Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, March 2nd, 2025, and this week Donald Trump is giving a joint session of Congress, better known as the State of the Union, going to take place on Tuesday, roughly around 9 p.m. Donald Trump, who has been the subject of a lot of scrutiny as the incumbent president of the United States, with a lot of recent decisions, namely one yesterday with an Oval Office dispute. Not yesterday, actually 2 days ago. It feels like it was yesterday, but it has been quite a while since we have seen any type of public displays of Donald Trump being combative with any other publicly elected officials. In this case, President Zelensky from Ukraine visited the Oval Office, to which we saw J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and himself get into an argument across the Oval Office in front of media, in front of everybody, in what was largely seen as a very negative dispute for Donald Trump's administration. But negative in a way that it is swaying away the voters that elected Donald Trump in the first place, potentially having consequences for the Republican Party in later elections this year and next year, and potentially even, yes, the next presidential election. CNN and SSRS have done a number of polls, and I've covered a lot of the data that they provided us with, but what is important to me is the crosstab data that we are getting from some of these polls that we see across the country, many of which find that the Republican Party is overly enthusiastic about what Donald Trump is doing. Many of the Republicans that might have been a bit more wavered on him in 2016 and potentially even 2020 are fully on board this time around with Donald Trump's second admin. Democrats, as ever, are disapproving of the job that Donald Trump does, very similar to how it was under his first term. But what I am focused on today is nothing more than the independent voters that are answering this survey that CNN says, how do you approve of Donald Trump's job of handling the Oval Office? The exact question written here, do you approve or disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling his job as president? And so they break it down, of course, by demographic group, by age group, by pretty much everything you can think about or consider. You're thinking about party affiliation, gender, race, age, income bracket, right? Education level, different things that are important for the American public in analyzing and understanding the way that the public views Donald Trump as this president. Now, again, hyper-focusing in on the independents because it shows something that I think in comparison to the last time they did a poll with Biden at the end of his term, we'll pull up the numbers in just a moment, we're starting to see some parallels being drawn between the two, at least in terms of how independents alone view them. Now, Joe Biden left office with a record low approval rating, according to CNN and SSRS, and it's no secret as to why that might be. With a combination of factors, Republicans never approved of Joe Biden as president, even when he was in this honeymoon phase, when he was up 23 points nationally. Even then, we saw a significant chunk, way more of the Republican Party had disapproved of him as president. But what was more important here was that Democrats were souring on Joe Biden. And you can see that in the CNN poll here, where they've done the same exact thing, asking the same exact question, swapping out Donald Trump and his name for Joe Biden this time around, but looking at the crosstab data when it comes down to how these voters vote, 29% of Democrats say they disapprove of the job that Joe Biden is doing. Now, 29% is massive, and it's massive for a reason. 29% means that 3 in 10 Democrats, or 1 in 3 Democrats are saying, I disapprove of the job that Joe Biden is doing. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of Democrats blaming Joe Biden for the 2024 election loss. His approval rating was lower this time than even after the presidential debate that resulted in Joe Biden eventually dropping out of the race. And so when we realize that it wasn't just Republicans and independents that are souring on Joe Biden, it was a lot of Democrats too that were very unhappy with the way he conducted himself in the 2024 presidential election, especially after they've lost said election. I can nearly guarantee that had Kamala Harris been elected the next president, his approval rating would have undoubtedly gone up amongst Democrats. The whole thank you Joe narrative that was spun through the DNC and pushed by the mainstream party was something that was only going to land well amongst the populace that voted for Kamala Harris. But since Donald Trump was elected, a lot of Democrats looked inward and said, I blame Joe Biden. Now, the other number I want to look at as a direct comparison point is independent voters. 69% of them say that they disapproved or leaned disapproval of Joe Biden's handling of the presidency. 69%. Remember that number. It matters because it was Biden leaving with the lowest approval rating of his term. 33% nationally, 69% of independents say, I disapprove of the job that Joe Biden is doing. Well, when we take a look at where Donald Trump is today, it feels very similar. Democrats and Republicans evenly split, 90-10, just in different directions depending on the party, approve, disapprove, or disapprove and approve, but it is independents that are bringing Donald Trump's numbers down. Overall, on the net, independent voters are bringing Donald Trump to a point where nationally he's roughly in the negative, according to CNN and SSRS. But looking at this independent number should be shocking for the Republican Party because the numbers here are 59-41. While we certainly don't see Donald Trump at a 33% approval rating, he's nowhere near where Biden was when he left office. Biden was far more unpopular, and if we're doing a comparison point, is far more unpopular. But it is that independent number because it matters for elections. A lot of the Democrats here who were saying, I disapprove of the job Joe Biden is doing, again, are never going to vote for the Republican Party just because they disapprove of the job that Joe Biden is doing. They may not be enthusiastic to vote, but you're not going to find that they're going to all of a sudden switch parties and vote for the GOP. If anything, this was a disapproval because they lost the election and felt that Joe Biden was the one to blame. This time around, nature is healing, in a sense. Both parties are split 90-10 in their respective directions, but independents being at 59% disapproval for Donald Trump is arguably a very bad place to be in this early on. You see, though the top line number seems very put together, if we had given Democrats the same number that, Donald Trump is experiencing right now, 90-10, Joe Biden would not have left office with the lowest approval rating of his term. He would have been at 39%, which isn't amazing, but it's only 6 or 7 points off from where Donald Trump is today, not 15 or 16 points off. And that makes a huge difference in terms of perception when you leave the Oval. But again, those Democrats were always and will continue going to vote blue. This time around, independents at 59%, Joe Biden at 69%, at his worst position ever, Donald Trump only being 10 points off of that is raising alarm bells, and arguably it should. These independent voters that matter a lot for 2026, and arguably too, some of the special elections that are set to take place, Elise Stefanik's race in November, set to take place, going to be important for Democrats and Republicans because the House majority is down to just 3 seats for the Republican Party. If Democrats flip it, which seems impossible, but Conor Lamb flipped a district that was just as pro-Trump in 2016 that eventually went to the Democrats in 17 and 18, we have to recognize that in 2026, the Democratic Party could be uniquely positioned to win a number of seats because of independent voters that are souring on Donald Trump. In the last month, Donald Trump's approval rating has gone from a point where it was +8 nationally now to just +0.7. That is a 7 to 8 point reduction in roughly 38 days. That matters in electoral politics. That makes a huge difference in the way the American public views a president because we're seeing it visualized, right? That is what is interesting about this all, is that it's so painstakingly obvious, arguably, what we're seeing from the American public, that they're not in approval of the way that Donald Trump is making, this administration out to be, these executive orders, these big decisions, the fighting over the Gulf of America, the fighting on national TV with foreign leaders. I mean, the American public does not positively respond to decisions and actions like those. And so that makes a huge difference when it comes down to the electoral lens of it all, because although Donald Trump might have won his second term, the Republican Party still has to fend for itself. They still have to contest and compete in elections. And in numerous special elections since Donald Trump has been elected, they've progressively gotten worse for the Republican Party, likely correlating with Donald Trump's approval rating that has gotten worse over time. Now, Donald Trump still benefits from what we know to be as this honeymoon phase, this honeymoon period for an administration where you really can do no harm, and the American public will largely approve of you historically from anywhere from 6 months to a year before souring on you right before your midterm elections. Donald Trump the first time only lasted roughly 2 weeks before his approval went under. It was day 14 that it tied, and it never recovered from there. This time, it's lasting over a month. But it's right at that convergence point where it is numbers like these, especially amongst independent voters, that as more and more independents sour, you can only max out the 90-10 Republican number so much, maybe 92-8, but there's always going to be that disgruntled portion of your party, and there's also never Trump Republicans that still exist today and still are part of the party affiliation, but that number dipping amongst independents makes all the difference. And the fact remains, Donald Trump is just outperforming Joe Biden by roughly 10 points amongst independents, and we're only a month into the administration. Joe Biden at his worst point doing just 10 points worse than Donald Trump amongst independents. That should warn the Republican Party that amongst those in the middle of the road, Although Donald Trump may have convinced them to vote for him this time around, what many of them now see is executive overreach. The involvement of Elon Musk and Doge in the federal government isn't something that is respected or revered by the American public. The Republican Party might be enthusiastic about it, but you have to ask these middle-of-the-road voters that might have said, Kamala Harris, I don't vote for because I think Joe Biden did a bad job as president and I have a difficult time differentiating them. Or I'm looking at this and saying, maybe Donald Trump's ads landed very well amongst independent voters who say, I'll vote for Trump because I think Kamala Harris is too extreme. These are arguments that were made by the Trump administration. But the actions that are being taken are no longer being viewed of as positively as before. Donald Trump was in a much better position amongst the CNN sample earlier on in his administration this time around. We can see that the approval rating, although never super great, was not in a position at where it was when he left office. But these independent voters are what is driving down Trump's approval massively. Even those who consider themselves to be more centrist, more moderate, 58 to 42, 58 to 42, right? That matters. People who see themselves as middle of the road, that are the swing voters in the next cycle, that are going to be what potentially drives Democrats to a 2018 style victory. Because these were the early warning signs that eventually led to Donald Trump's defeat in 2020, but the Republican Party's defeat in 17, 18, 19, and then, yes, again in 2020. And so I think the Republican Party and the Trump administration should look at this and say, maybe we should walk things back, or at least not be perceived or go across as extreme as they are presently. Because there is no electoral benefit of telling the American public anything you want them to hear, or trying to shift the way that Republicans do politics in a way that is entirely controversial. What we are seeing from this administration, while may have been elected in 2024, has now been started to largely be viewed as executive overreach. And it is really hard to shake that perception amongst the American public once they already have it. Biden couldn't do it, and I'm not confident that Donald Trump can either. And so when we look at data points like these, and we continue to see more and more showing a tightening of Donald Trump's approval rating, I leave that warning with the Republican Party, that this could be the beginning of the end of Donald Trump's approval. And although he may not have another election to win, the Republican Party absolutely does. And he only hinders that, given he's in his second term, no direct electoral repercussions for him, but rather for his party. But what we have seen historically is Donald Trump far outperforms his party for a variety of different reasons, and I think we could very often see that this happen. We could see that happen again in 2025, 2026, and beyond. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2028, or I guess second Trump administration analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.